every day I meet people that make me smile, inspire me, and they've got a story to tell, and it makes me a better human being. And that sounds really sort of twee and a bit sort of non-robust military army bloke, but that's the reality. This place feels like our happy place, and every day's a challenge. Every day's fascinating. Every day makes me have to make decisions that I wouldn't necessarily probably have if I was living back in the UK, I guess.
From Cairo to Cape Town, Lagos to Lamu, 54 nations, one continent, countless perspectives. Hi, I'm Waweru Njoroge.
Hi, I'm Njoroge.
Welcome to Panel 54, a global perspective through an African lens. This is the podcast where we unpack power, policy, people, and the paradoxes that define our time, with nuance, with history, and with a deliberate commitment to context. This isn't punditry, it's perspective. It's not a briefing, it's a reframing, and it starts right here.
In this episode, we focus on what conflict actually looks like up close, what happens when diplomacy fails, how militaries operate inside fragile political systems, and what international partnerships really change on the ground.
Our guest is Frederick Grounds, better known to many as Freddie, a former lieutenant colonel in the British Army with 3 decades of service, much of it spent training and supporting African armed forces across the continent. Since leaving the military, he has been based in Nairobi, continuing to work across Africa from a practitioner's perspective. So Freddie, thank you so much. Welcome to Panel 54.
Pleasure to be here.
All right, we're going to start off basically, we're going to jump into it, but we're going to do the King and I, getting to know you kind of a bit first, just so people can understand what your background is, what brought you to Kenya, and those kind of things.
So we came to Kenya in 2013. I was in the part of the British Army back then. So we left there at the end of middle of 2016 and went down to South Africa. The British Army, the British military had a defence engagement team based out of South Africa, which had been there for many years. Started during when Mandela was released from prison, and he had the challenge of combining numerous military factions, and the British were invited to send a team to assist him with doing that. So sadly, I suspect that it had run its course. So the team was closed down, and we found ourselves moving back up to Nairobi. We got back to Nairobi in 2017, having already decided that this was probably where we wanted to settle anyway and finish. During the crazy days of COVID, we were evacuated from Kenya, and which was a slightly strange experience on the basis that there was no real COVID cases in Kenya, but we got evacuated back to the eye of the storm in the UK. Mm-hmm. And it was at that point that the idea of leaving Africa and leaving Kenya was too great, and I resigned from the army, and we moved back out here at the end of 2020, and we've been here ever since. Mm-hmm. So, and I've spent the last 5 years doing various security-related defence or military training activities across the whole of sub-Saharan Africa, actually.
Okay. You missed the uniform.
That's a question that's asked a lot. I think and the sort of the go-to default response is I miss the camaraderie, I miss the friends and the sense of loyalty and being part of a big organisation. But I think after 30 years of serving in the military, it had sort of run its course, probably.
So what has surprised you most in terms of now, okay, fine, you trained in the UK, did the South Africa thing, and I'm sure you've done a lot of postings within the African continent. But what surprised you most about life here? Let's start with Kenya and then move to the broader places you actually have been in within the continent. Compared to, I suppose it's a comparative, yes. But what is the most surprising thing about life here?
I have this argument, or not argument, but slight disagreement with my sort of wider family, who can't quite understand why I'm here and why we chose to sort of settle here. And I think because every day I meet people that make me smile, inspire me, and they've got a story to tell, and it makes me a better human being. And that sounds really sort of twee and a bit sort of non-robust military army bloke, but that's the reality. This place feels like our happy place, and every day's a challenge. Every day's fascinating. Every day makes me have to make decisions that I wouldn't necessarily probably have if I was living back in the UK, I guess.
Okay. Random question. Favorite food?
Thai.
Okay, well, I'm saying.
Sorry, I should be saying ugali, shouldn't I?
I was going to say it should automatically be ugali.
Yeah, I mean, ugali's great. Out of choice, it would be Thai.
Okay. What do you miss?
Which is tricky to find here, but it's not impossible.
Oh, it's quite a few decent restaurants, actually. What do you miss most from the UK then?
Family.
Okay.
I don't miss very much else about the UK at the moment, to be honest with you. No, I don't. I think.
Okay, well, I guess kind of a last one on this is, did people speak to you differently? Did you notice anything different after not being in the army and being in the military anymore? The way people spoke to you, or the way they treated you, was that different?
That's a really good question. I think there was a noticeable difference when we were no longer part of the military umbrella, and I think that's a lot of Kenyans, Mzungus and Kenyans, our children were educated here. I think there's a reluctance with military families to become too close to them because of the pain of, especially children, having to sort of get rid of relationships that they've spent 2 years developing. Whereas I think once you've made the commitment to decide that this is where actually you want to be longer term, there is a difference. People are definitely approach you in a slightly different way.
Okay. Sorry, we can shift gears now. I want to look at the aspect of what Africa looks like up close, and what happens when diplomacy actually fails. But when people talk about conflict in Africa in abstract terms, what do they most consistently get absolutely wrong?
I think that if we're talking about outsiders, we are, I think, a lack of understanding of everything, of the culture, of the dynamics, of the politics, of the. We Africans don't even understand this complex country or continent. So how can somebody that's not from here even start to understand it? So I think a lack of understanding leads to, sadly, many other follow-on, second and third order effect problems. And I suppose the reality is, we've chosen to make this our home, and this is our happy place. But if you are sat in Washington or in London or in Paris, the continent of Africa is a very long way away. And so I think, I guess it's not on their radar. In the same way that Ukraine is on their radar, in the same way that Gaza is on their radar. It feels, because it's closer, it feels that much more real.
Right.
But the reality is that the single greatest sort of humanitarian disaster on globally right now is happening just a little bit north of here in Sudan. And people that I speak to back in the UK wouldn't even be able to tell you where Sudan is on a map.
Okay. So in your experience then, what's that moment? What does it look like when diplomacy fails and it's the inevitable takeover of violence?
Well, it doesn't happen with a bang, right? It's a slow process where the diplomatic process has sort of failed. It becomes increasingly strained, and then the language changes, and people talk differently. They're no longer talking about cooperation, partnerships, trying to solve it. The language changes. The posture of the international community changes. It might be the reduction of the diplomatic footprint, and even closure of their embassies. It's neighbours starting to posture and maybe relocating their military forces. So, but it happens sort of almost under the radar, and it certainly doesn't happen with a bang. I think it is a lack of understanding of the dynamics and the environment, and it always surprises me and slightly alarms me that it's not high on people's agenda to actually understand the environment in which they're operating.
Right, and so like you say, it's not a one-day breakdown of a relationship or breakdown of whatever agreement. It's sustained over time. What you see as violent is a culmination of broken pieces of a relationship. Would you agree?
Completely.
Okay.
Yeah, completely.
Going back, sorry,
go on.
Karen. No, so going back to that aspect of a lack of understanding, I need to look at least shine a light on the fact of what war does actually to civilians, because a lot of time it's like, yeah, soldiers fighting and all that kind of stuff, and we talked about Sudanese 14 million being displaced. What does war actually do to the civilians? And this is long after the international eye has now kind of gone off it, basically. Once the fighting is ended, international people have said, okay, fine, we don't seem to be that interested in it anymore. What happens to those people who are trying to pick up the pieces of their lives?
It destroys them. It destroys them mentally, emotionally. Their trust in the systems that they rely upon to keep them safe has been eroded. So it breaks societies. I mean, not just the sort of the physical toll of war, but the emotional toll of war as well. And wars are expensive, right?
Mm.
They don't come cheaply in terms of financially expensive.
Right.
And that will take years and generations for a government to be able to sort of do a regain financially, to put in place all of the financial systems and the social welfare systems that society need and require.
Right.
So it's devastating. Long after it's just the kinetic fighting piece is the start of the journey for the civilian population.
Yeah. So we're looking at Africa and we're seeing that, military spending is increasing at a time when, political legitimacy and institutional trust are waning, weakening. Sometimes the armed forces have become the most coherent institution, capable of stabilizing authority or distorting it. Clear. In some countries, the military appears more coherent than the state itself. Some kind of order may have been instituted. What dangers does that create politically and operationally?
Well, the military are, they're answerable to the politicians and to society. So if you have a political system that is weaker than the military, you've got a sort of a body where the spine is more powerful than or more influential and more powerful than the brain itself, and that's a pretty terrifying situation. So trust in the military is hard earned and easily lost, and I suppose that's why joint collaborative exercises and training is a way of developing your military capability to perform to the standards and that our civilian audience requires us to.
So we're gonna expand on the collaboration aspect, but you talked about the training aspect as well. When you go and train fragile states, for lack of a better term, where does one's loyalty sit in reality? Does it sit with the constitution? Does it sit with the commander? Does it sit with the regime, or does it sit with the community?
So I think that at the lowest level, training soldiers to be better soldiers, to be more accountable soldiers, in my experience, is pushing against an open door. And African militaries I've all of the African militaries that I've sort of given assistance to, I've hopefully assisted, but I've also learnt an enormous amount from them as well. So this is a two-way journey. But that's a relatively straightforward process because there's a military brotherhood, and we sort of talk the same language militarily, and so that's familiar territory. I think it's at the sort of the higher levels and the command levels where people of influence and authority have the ability to maybe put personal interests ahead of the greater good.
Right.
So I think that's where the challenge is, and in my experience, especially here, on the continent of Africa, it's much more vivid to me is the survival mechanism, and that people adopt sort of, they adopt a type of human nature, which is to protect your loved ones and your family and your property, and if that's threatened, then I think allegiances sort of suddenly fly out of the window. Right. And if you think that you're going to get a better deal by siding with somebody else, so I think that loyalty shifts depending on your circumstances, but it's more likely to shift for sort of the people further up the food chain that have got more influence.
Mm-hmm. And you. So, how often does professional military training collide with political stability realities? Is that a thing that happens a lot? Or is it the military over here, politics, or do they marry at some point?
I think that there are plenty of occasions where it hasn't worked out.
Right.
I think it's built on that sort of shared respect and honesty with each other. And if the military are the ones that sort of, in a training capacity, the military, as a trainer, my responsibility was to train them to be able to respond to maybe a terrorist incident, maybe a natural disaster, or maybe an act of aggression from a neighbour or internally. But it's the politicians that decide who I'm going to go, or the people I'm training are going to go and fight or go, and so they're the people that make the decision. Mm-hmm. So which is challenging. So I think at the lowest level, it's relatively straightforward.
Okay.
But I think as you go up the food chain, it becomes increasingly more challenging.
Okay. I always deliver my promises. So, collaboration. So earlier we had briefly talked about collaboration, and I'd like to look at international military collaboration and Kenya's joint training in that kind of context. So Kenya does regularly host multinational military exercises with a lot of Western partners. These are usually framed as interoperability or capacity building exercises. Now, collaboration is never linear. It doesn't look in one straight line. So it's never neutral, as it were. It shapes doctrine, how certain countries work from that perspective. It also shapes incentives. It also shapes long-term power relationships. So from your experience, what separates military collaboration that genuinely strengthens a country versus collaboration that quietly weakens it?
I think that, the benefits of collaboration in training are a shared understanding, mutual respect, common operating procedures, having an understanding how each other operates, and so at time of crisis, it makes the whole bonding process that much easier and more coherent and straightforward. I suppose and I think we spoke about it earlier. At the lowest level, when you're dealing with at the tactical level, that's relatively straightforward.
Right.
When I think it's at the higher levels that it starts to unpick itself at the seams, or it can do, with where the differences in doctrine or the differences in political agendas can start to have an impact an influence on it. And military forces are supposed to be apolitical, right? So I think it's at the point at which that it really starts to unravel is where the military start to encroach into the political sphere and the political environment. So and that's not the role of the military. That's the role of our politicians and our political leaders.
Sure.
So I think that's probably where the frictions start to really show themselves.
Okay.
Many African countries have, in the recent past and even currently, welcomed a lot of military exercise, whether it's in Nigeria, that's happening, South Africa, happening as well, Kenya, happening. Do these exercises, at whatever level, actually improve situations within countries from what you've seen?
And what do these exercises actually entail?
What's going on here? What's actually going on when there's a military exercise? What's going on?
Well, often in these, it's more aimed at the sort of the operational level as opposed to the tactical level. So the tactical level, they're there to facilitate, but actually the real benefit comes from the operational level, where commanders are planning together. The actual sort of bullets and bombs and the delivery aspect is great for the troops, and they absolutely will get enormous value out of it, and the drills and the practicing of the drills. But it's at the operational level, at the planning level, and those shared experiences and sharing the sharing of knowledge and the best practices. So and that's not, that's just in the actual sort of kinetic warfighting piece, or I mean, this exercise that's ongoing is partially land based, I'm led to believe, and also some of it is out at sea, and so I think it's sending a message to any would-be adversaries,
right, that
we are in this together, and that you're not picking a fight with just one of us. There's a number of us. If you are a would-be pirate off the coast of Somalia, then hopefully you'll be looking on this as shot across the bow. Collaborative training, shared expenses, shared technology, shared best practice and experience, shared logistics, trails, and the best way to sustain a force, etc. So I think it's at the sort of the operational level that the real benefit comes from. But I mean, and I suppose it comes down to trust, respect, that Kenya is hosting this, and they are a major player at the table. They haven't just come along for the ride,
right?
Yeah, and I'm sure that they're American, UK, Australian, French guests on the exercise are demonstrating that they're in this together.
Okay. We're going to close on geopolitics and African soil, but before we go to that, I'm just wanting to look at, do we paint a target on our backs? So do these exercises on the continent, do they move the countries that you're doing the exercises into leadership, or is it simply increase the responsibility? Well,
I think the aspiration is that they improve leadership, and you increasingly now see, for a long time on a lot of the African missions on the continent of Africa are headed up and commanded and led by Africans, which is exactly as it should be. So I think there's always a danger that the countries external to Africa think that they know the solutions to the continent of Africa, and that obviously couldn't be further from the truth. It won't be through lack of ability; it's through lack of experience, I think.
Okay.
There's been that sort of delay in having African leaders commanding African missions. So, I mean, I think the benefit is inevitably then there's some responsibility that comes with it, right? But I think it's developing the leadership is where the benefits really lie.
All right, let's look at an area where the world's politics are played on African soil. It's not the first time; it's happened before. Africa now has overlapping security footprints. The US operates its largest permanent site in the continent, and that's in Djibouti. The Chinese have also established its first overseas. Russia's expanding security engagement across parts of the Sahel. Across the continent, we can see that partnerships are multiplying, but sovereignty remains contested in terms of who owns the thing. With China operating a military base in Djibouti and Russia active in parts of the Sahel, how do you read Africa's place in the changing global security order? And this is coming off the back of what we've said previously, where are you going to trade in your sovereignty for this partnership? Do we see that happening? What's Africa's place here, where we say everybody come in and do whatever it is that you want to do? Or is Africa, should it, realist versus idealist, take a position and say, okay, well, you can come in, practice for yourself into partnerships, but this is our stand? Do we see Africa taking a firm stand currently with all these operations from other countries in the geopolitical space?
I think increasingly African nations are doing that, and finding a voice to say this is our turf and this is our patch, and so which they are morally bound to do to the citizens of that they represent. So I think absolutely they must and have to take a much firmer view, an approach, and have ownership of it, because otherwise, I suppose the danger is they sell their soul down to the highest bidder.
I imagine that the answer lurks in the minds of many, but is never expressed, because it's an unfolding situation and we're not really sure exactly what's happening until somebody is overtly expressive about it. Can we maintain state sovereignty as African nations, at the same time allow these operations, which are directly linked to other countries' state sovereignty, operate in the same space? Can we actually do that?
Well, I think you have to. I think that the sovereignty is what it's about, right? It is paramount. So you can't pawn that off to another nation.
What are the ethical red lines that foreign militaries should never cross on African soil?
For foreign militaries, it's encroaching into the political space.
Okay.
Yeah, the moment that foreign militaries become politically motivated or a political actor rather than a security partner is dangerous territory. That to me would be the ethical red line of not crossing.
Okay. And I wanted to add something to that as well. When we think the military and we think authority, we sometimes imagine that these are not human beings who are in these operations or in these trainings or in these exercises. But sometimes this authoritative outlook crosses over to the social. And that these are folks who are operating in societies where there are people. Are those lines that should never be crossed? Friendships form, collaborations form outside that sometimes could be controversial in society. Should those be frowned upon? Is that an ethical red line that shouldn't be crossed?
I don't think it is an ethical red line, because it goes back to what I was saying earlier about lack of understanding of the operational environment or the context. And you can only get that by, in my experience, you can only get that by talking to people, by integrating with people, by understanding what keeps them awake at night, and what their challenges are. And if you fail to do that, then you're going to be there's a level of lack of empathy to the people that you're serving or the people that you are supposed to be protecting that you won't get.
Freddie, should friendships form outside of
it's
the
inevitable.
military?
It depends what sort of relationship we're talking about here,
well,
I suppose. I mean, there's sadly been a number of in the past situations where the military have overstepped that relationship and overstepped the mark. But I don't think, in my experience, not necessarily on operations in Africa, but in other parts of the world, the time where I have, if I take it back to Iraq, I kept my company and my unit safe because of the conversations that I was having outside in the community, and I was able to make sure that firstly my soldiers behaved in an ethical, proper, professional, empathetic manner, and that if they overstepped the mark, then because of my relationships within the community and community, but also at sort of the governance level and in the security services level, then I knew that I would very quickly hear of any infringements by any of my soldiers.
Okay.
So I was able to hold them to account, and by doing that, it sort of gained trust, gained respect, mutual trust, and as a result, it was more likely that I would find out about something that might be going to happen.
Right.
So it's about having the conversation and the dialogue, and the last resort should be a military, or should be a combat kinetic response.
Okay.
Yeah, that should be the last response.
So what? How do I put this? What is the biggest danger that African leaders and their international partners are underestimating actually right now? The biggest danger that Africans and their military partners are underestimating.
The illusion that they're in control.
Okay.
Maybe.
From what context?
Well, that they think that they are in control, but actually, the dynamics at the sort of community levels is such that they're not reading the room. So, and if they're not reading the room, then they won't understand the real issues that are facing them, which they might be able to paper over the cracks to start with, but eventually it will start to come away at the seams. And so the strength and the power of the community shouldn't be underestimated, I think, as long as they feel that they've got the voice, or that they'll be heard.
So just a quick one as a wrap up, and this is I don't know how else to phrase this question. How much action have you seen?
How much action?
Waweru is all for the guns and the blood.
Yeah, okay. So there's two ways to read that, but in terms of, I suppose what people like to know, or I would like to know, is situations where you were actually at some point thinking it's either them or me.
I suppose after 30 years I've had a little bit of exposure to that. I think that there's certainly in and I'm sort of avoiding the question a little bit here, but in my experience, I didn't join the army I didn't join the military to kill, maim, and destroy people's lives.
Yes.
I don't think that most people, certainly in the military that I served in, I don't think that anyone joins for that in mind, with that sort of to-do list, or with that in mind. And if they do, then frankly they have no place in the military. So that wasn't the reason I joined the military. It was not to I hope that my time in the military and the time that I've spent training African militaries since leaving the military, full-time military, has helped solve and resolve issues than accelerate them, exacerbate them. I've certainly had situations where I've felt slightly uncomfortable and would have rather have not been where I was.
Yeah, but slightly uncomfortable is such a diplomatic way of putting it.
Of saying my life was in ardent
That's
danger.
And I suppose I've had those sort of a few of those situations here on the continent of Africa as well. But it's incredible what having a conversation and sitting down and trying to talk about our differences can have, as opposed to, sort of upping the ante. It always amazes me when, the response, is immediately to go to sort of, code red, without even attempting to have the conversations that might keep the conversation, or keep the dynamics or the situation at a sensible sensible level.
So set phasers on stun as opposed to kill, and don't go to DEFCON 1.
Okay, the top one, yeah.
Freddie, America has led trainings on the continent, oftentimes with the joint help of Great Britain. Why has this relationship lasted? And how is it beneficial for all parties?
I guess I don't really want to go down the sort of colonial route, but I suspect that I know that certainly most of the militaries that I've trained over the last 12, 15 years have been previously part of the British Empire. Mm-hmm. And so there are shared experiences, shared understandings, shared terminology, that stretches back for a very long time, and I suppose that's difficult to shift away from. So, then much of the doctrine is based on UK or American doctrine. I mean, I think the Americans. I've done a lot of partner training with the Americans, and of course they are, a considerably larger training partner than the UK, but historically the UK's ties to the continent of Africa have been far greater, right? So I mean, all of the training, and actually it's not just with the Americans either. I've delivered training with the French. Clearly the French historically and up until, well, even now, still deliver training to the francophone parts of the continent. So similar doctrine, similar weapon systems, similar equipment, similar ideals and values, and many of those officers from those Anglophone nations have regularly send officers and non-commissioned soldiers to the UK and to the States. And it does come with a slight government health warning, because even between the Americans and the Brits, we simple things. Some of the terminology that we use is slightly different and can lead to confusion when you're delivering training events.
Yeah.
But it's a long, mutually respected partnership with many of those African nations, and I think, certainly something that I was have always been keen to do is, it's not just about delivering activity to the Malawian Defence Force, for example. Mm-hmm. I remember delivering activity to the Malawian Defence Force, and I managed to get Zambian instructors on female engagement teams dealing with conflict, sexual related violence, to come and instruct Malawian soldiers for a different mission, but it was Africans training Africans. And that, to me, because we should have an exit strategy, right? So, we shouldn't be if we're properly capacity building and we're properly giving African militaries the ability to stand on their own 2 feet and that sounds terribly condescending, but to be able to deliver the training themselves, we've got to make sure that we've got to have an exit strategy. And we can't just keep on, because otherwise then you develop a dependence culture and all of those sort of things within the training space. So and the reality is that certainly I use Malawi as an example, and they're now training themselves. They are about to send, I think my understanding is, a second contingent to a different mission. So not only are they now completely training themselves, but they're also increasing the commitment that they're making to security and the security infrastructure or architecture on the continent.
As we're doing these trainings, what threats are we actually training for?
Well, if we're talking about the maritime exercise that's happening at the moment,
right,
and we're talking, the threat. So none of that's not strictly true, actually. So in some training activities, we are training for the war, preparing Malawian or Zambian troops to go and support the UN missions in Central African Republic or in the Democratic Republic of Congo, or Ugandan soldiers that are, or Burundian soldiers that are supporting AMIS, the African Union in Somalia. Mm-hmm. So some of those activities are deliberately preparing soldiers and contingents to go to a specific mission. Something like this maritime exercise that's being run at the moment is preparing for a war or an event, and that might be, piracy off the coast of Somalia. It might be tensions in the Red Sea. I think probably somebody said to me that the English Channel was the busiest shipping channel in the world. But I mean, the Red Sea Channel and through the Suez and down the Horn of Africa must be up there as one of them. So a terrorist event, non-state actors, an environmental event. Militaries are good at moving quickly, human resources, logistics to resolve an issue. If you look a little bit south from here at the moment with the floods in Mozambique and in parts of eastern South Africa, northeastern South Africa, I mean, there's a catastrophe happening there on a scale that is unimaginable, and a military response, combined military response of moving, bridging assets, and I mean that's one of the strengths of preparing for doing this training. There may well be more obvious threats than that are being tracked by the intelligence services, by shared intelligence, shared information. But I think certainly when it comes to this that's happening down in Mombasa, I mean, what a great event, what a great huge kudos to defence forces, to the Navy for stepping up, hosting this and facilitating this exercise, and the message that sends is to any would-be adversaries.
Indeed.
Especially in this slightly strange geopolitical world that we find ourselves in.
Freddie, thank you so much for joining us on Panel 54 and all those insights in terms of how collaboration works, what Africa is to other countries in terms of joint military exercises, what leadership looks like through those kind of collaborations, and also the aspect of the civilian casualties of war on the continent as well.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Freddie. This conversation reminds us that force rarely announces itself as repression. It arrives justified as stability, professionalism, or necessity. We've talked about what conflict looks like up close, how diplomacy fails, and how civilians carry the consequences long after the wars fade from view.
We've also tested a difficult idea. In fragile states, military coherence can stabilize systems, but it can also replace political legitimacy rather than support it. And on partnerships, rather, the line is thin. Collaboration can strengthen capacity, but it can also shift dependency, blur accountability, and quietly move power out of public reach.
Africa's challenge is not a lack of partners, it's the ability to enforce limits, because sovereignty is not a speech. It is the capacity to say yes, to say no, and to hold that line when saying no is expensive. You've been listening to Panel 54, where we rethink the world one African perspective at a time. If this episode made you pause, reflect, or reframe, share it, start a conversation, and tag us in. Find us on social media, our handle at Panel54Pod, or your favorite streaming platform, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode.
Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and remember, keep the lens clear. Panel 54, a global perspective through an African lens.